I am with you. I'm so glad that you've got this on recording, and I know we're going to ruffle some feathers by having this conversation. And I think it's important for us to be having these challenging conversations because, as a profession, one of the things that we want is that our clients always feel trust and safety.
Hello, Lyssa deHart here, and I'm looking forward to introducing you to my next guest on the coaching studio today. Carly Anderson is someone you have probably heard of if you've been in the coaching space for any length of time. She's a coaching veteran. She began back in 1998, back in the day in Sydney, Australia, really immersing herself in coaching. She is now based in the United States, and she is an ICF Competencies and Credentialing expert and authority. Beyond that, Carly is an ICF assessor and has been a driving force in evolving coaching standards through multiple initiatives. I welcome to the studio a person with a deep commitment to evolving coaching. I hope you enjoy the interview. Welcome, Carly Anderson.
Fun to listen to. Yes, 1998 feels like a long time ago.
A long time ago. I know. It's so funny. I got married in 1998, and so it's like one of those years that sort of stuck in my mind as one of those years that I'm like, I can tell you it was like 25 years ago, like off the top of my head.
Exactly. Well,
Yeah.
that's
So
great we share
welcome,
that.
welcome so much to the show. I'm I'm really curious, you and I had a conversation and really curious to get to know you as a person as well as a coach. And and the idea that we get to where we are based on sets of different markers in our life that really propel us into the moment that we find ourselves. And I'm curious, as you're thinking back on your own journey from 1998, really, what were some of the pivotal markers that led to you even initiating this journey back then?
Well, the first thing is I didn't initiate this journey. It found me. Uh, I think what I initiated in my mid-20s, when it wasn't, again, initiated by me, was actually responsiveness to some friends who thought that I should do a personal development program, especially the husband of those two friends. He didn't like me very much and he thought I needed an attitude adjustment, let's say. And he was right. And he suggested a fairly deep personal development program. And it came at a time when I was being fired from a job as a manager in an advertising agency. I had been doing very well and then I didn't do well. And it just came at the perfect time. So I did that. And that was 9 years earlier, I think, or 10 years earlier than I ever found coaching. But in that meantime, I think that was a real driving force because I really engaged in personal development, in therapy. I learned so much about myself that by the time one of my colleagues told me that he was bringing the first ever coach training program to Australia and he thought I should do it. I was like, what? He goes, yeah, I think you'd be a great coach. And I remember saying, I'm not a people person. I'm a businesswoman. I had a business with employees at that time. He said, oh, I think you'd enjoy it. So I have to say, coaching found me just like personal development found me. And yet I know I was searching each time.
There's something that you said about, being told that you could really use personal development and the caliber of strength that is required in a person to hear that and not just go shut the door to it, but rather begin the exploration of it. What allowed you to make that like, how did you get there that you were even willing to explore this idea of self-development after being told, like, hey, you kind of need to do this? It's a fascinating thing. Like, what allows that?
Well, he was a little more subtle than that. He said, "I think you'd really benefit from." He sent me because it was a letter was actually in the mail. He said, "I think you would really benefit." His wife and him had just participated in the program, and granted, they were also in their 20s. They were even younger than me, so it was quite something, really. And they said, "Well, I think you would really benefit from it, and really recommend you do it." And it came at a time, and while I was flippant about being fired, I wasn't really fired from the advertising agency. Uh, I had been in the advertising profession for about 5, 6 years, and then in the media department planning campaigns, which I loved. And then I was asked to go to another company, the second largest advertising agency in Australia, and be promoted to a media manager. But I was 26 or 25,
Mm,
and I thought I was better than what I was, and I failed miserably. I didn't really know the people I was managing at that time. I had a group of 4. They knew more than me, and so I was struggling. I was stressed. I went from being a high performer to an extremely stressed low performer, and they lost a $20 million account. And so it was very fortuitous that they went, we're getting rid of the team that was on that account. It was nothing to do with our productivity. It was to do with they just didn't retain it after a year. And I
yeah.
was there a year. And so that I didn't realize that was the deal. I was brought on to as part of that team. So that was a prompt. And that is why when I got his information, I actually was like, wow, this is perfect. And the day that I was given a month to stay, of course, and then I left.
Hmm.
And I timed that day was when the personal development, the day I left was the day the personal development program started. And it was a 4-day intensive. So
Like
it
the
was
universe.
perfect timing. Yeah, it was. It was the universe conspiring to support me with my development because I was not in a good place after that.
Yeah, I mean, I just really want to acknowledge you. I had a similar thing. It wasn't nearly as high stakes, but a similar thing in my life where I thought I was rocking it at a job, and I had a manager who was just generous enough. And I mean, that's sort of like your friend being generous enough to write you the letter that said, my manager said to me something to the effect of, there's 2 ways we can do this. One, you really learn how to do your job and I'm happy to support you. Or 2, we just part ways and it's no harm, no foul. And I was like, I need the job, but also apparently I need to learn how to do the job also. And it was that willingness. And I think that's what I just really resonate with in your story, is that people who evolve into amazing capacity to be influential within an arena like coaching don't necessarily come from this perfect line of only success, 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 but rather it's woven through with these moments of like self-discovery based on like a kind of a crisis of sorts, that leads us to these moments. And I just really want to acknowledge you and also appreciate that that's the sort of person that you are. I love that.
Thank you. It was nothing um, mental, it was just responsive. And to
Yeah.
be honest, I became very successful in my own business after I was taken out of the advertising industry. I did get offered quite a lot of jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
I did take another job within the advertising industry for a couple of years, but I didn't have the same passion. And I got paid extremely well for doing work that I found very, very easy at that time. The first time when I worked for the largest advertising agency, I found I was always so passionate. I studied night school to learn more about the craft. I was so passionate. So it took me a couple of years, really, Lyssa, I felt like I was depressed. I wouldn't say clinical depression, but just normal depression of like, oh my gosh, I felt I was doing so well. And now this comes along and I'm not as good as I thought I was because I just kept doing more work because I loved it. I didn't want to get promoted. I just passionate about learning, and that's what got me places. And then I actually formed I went, there's a big leap there, but I formed a company for consulting around vision, values, and strategic planning, and how to communicate that to everyone in larger organizations. And I had 4 or 5 employees with a partner, and that was where coaching came at when I was in that space. And again, very, very successful in a
Mm-hmm.
very short period of time. Wasn't satisfied that we were doing anything really of value that made a difference in the organization. And then pops my friend and says, I'm bringing coach training to Australia. And I was like, once I'd done the first 60 hours, because it was all in person, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the missing piece. Coaching is the missing piece because that's what keeps the training actually into action and behavior change was coaching process.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's true, right? Like you go to a training, it's great, you learn stuff, you have an epiphany, an aha, it's brilliant, you walk away and you default right back to your past behaviors like that.
Yeah, that's it is. It's coaching is behavior change because it's not one-off sessions are not coaching to me. One-off sessions are problem solving, consulting, advising. Coaching is an ongoing process, whether that's 3 sessions, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, or 5 years of coaching. Who knows? Which I've done all of those with clients. It's more than one session, and there's accountability in that process. When I'm being coached, I want to turn up to my coaching sessions having done something. It's a great accountability process.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, and that really sort of brings us into the coaching in and of itself. I mean, you really dove into coaching, I would assume, to develop your way of seeing it, the competencies, and of course the competencies were different, slightly different, verbally different earlier, and now they're new. What has been that evolution that you've seen with the competencies through the years?
Well, I can't remember being taught the competencies in my first coach training program in 1999 was when I did my coach. 1998, sorry. Yeah, 1999, by the time I'd finished, I really didn't know. I couldn't tell you what the competencies were. It's not that they weren't taught, they weren't really explicit like they are now.
Mhm.
Uh, what what I really learned was once I actually got my MCC, which was in 2005. Then I was invited to train to be an ICF assessor for all three school levels. But that's when I started to learn about the competencies, to be honest. And now it's different because I am on faculty still for the same coach training program, even though I don't do a lot of training anymore as one of their faculty. I know where the curriculum is now, and it's completely different. So the students learn from the beginning about the core competencies.
Mhm.
That's not how it was back in the day. And so, yeah, I've used them. Once I became an assessor, I felt like I actually had a whole new learning playground. I was like, wow, these are cool. My gosh, these are behavior and mindset, and I can learn so much. And yes, one of my great drivers is excellence and learning. And I always want to be the best I can be for me. And so that gave me a framework to learn about. And the assessing and then having a mentor who I worked with to mentor me to be an assessor was fabulous. And then I just kept that process going because I'm also married to an MCC coach who's also an assessor. So that's how I came to be in the US 22 years ago, is I married an ICF MCC coach who was American and I'm Australian.
Yeah, so hence the traveling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's something that I hear sometimes, and so I'd love to hear your perspective on this, but I hear this, the competencies are too structured, it's too much like this is something that I've heard. I don't know. I imagine you've heard something similar from people. I don't really buy into this need for these different elements of the competency. So I'm really curious about what your response to that perspective might be.
Well, I am currently leading group 71 and 72 of my mentor coaching programs.
Yeah,
That's over 10
yay. That's
years.
amazing. Amazing.
And I can assure you that whether these coaches are brand new or whether they've got 2.5, 5,500 hours, that by studying the core competencies, they all learn how to be better coaches. And it's what's missing is somebody hasn't taken them through and gone, this is what this behavior means. And here's some examples of that. And then obviously they will hear coaching and they will experience being mentored as well and getting distinctions. So,
Mhm.
for example, space, I'll just say most coaches will coach at the pace of the coach, like because we're not in the moment. As coaches, we have the questions. We're on the outside. We've done this maybe a lot. In the moment, the client is having an in-body experience. The moment we're asked a question like, now, what does that symbol behind you mean, Lyssa? Yeah,
And And what does it mean? Right. And taking the time to allow me to really explain that and even think about it, to your point, maybe I haven't really thought about it. Maybe I placed it there, or maybe I had thought about it, but not in context to the experience that I'm having in this other situation.
And it requires more RAM, more of ourselves. We need space. We need to, even in that moment, you took a pause
Right.
to
Like,
consider what's she talking about and what do I want to say about that? And so we need to be aware of coaching at the pace of the client's ability to process, digest, consider, and then integrate, explore. And when we just ask one more question, one more thing, make one, I call it coaching at the pace of the coach. And
yeah.
just that distinction alone is quite amazingly transformational for some coaches, because it also brings up their fear of, what if there's space and the client thinks I don't know what I'm talking about? So, or their beliefs. And also, sometimes my clients at the end of a coaching engagement will tell me, and then, when we do our debriefs of what worked, what did you get, what else did you get, what are you doing next? Where's, is it coaching or something else? One of the things they'll often tell me is my presence or the space I allowed them is one of the most important things they learned. And so that's why I know it's so important, because we never talk about those things during the coaching, but they tell me that you've given me permission to, by you doing it with me, I realize I can listen to my team members more, or my family more. It's changed the way I've listened to my ex-wife, for instance, when co-parenting our child, because now I can actually listen and have space rather than I've got to get my word in. So
Mhm.
that's what I mean. The competencies, that word space shows up in the core competencies under presence, maintains presence, allows for space, pause, or silence, or reflection time. And if you go through the competencies like this and have an exploration of them, they become these rich, alive behavior and mindset opportunities for us.
Yeah, I'm an absolute 100% believer in agreement in that the nuances of the competencies actually are the framework that holds the space, so a client actually is able to do that inside out work. They have, to your point, the pause, but they also have the invitation. I don't know about other people's experience, but most of us don't live in a world in which people actually really listen to what we have to say. And we're on autopilot. So we're just sort of like, hey, here's my story, blah, 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 right? And it's the same thing. And we may improve it slightly, but it is still like we're on autopilot, they're on autopilot, and we're having these sort of autopilot conversations. And what I'm really hearing from you is it's the practice, and I may be paraphrasing incorrectly, so please correct me, but it's the practice of inviting that space to have a real conversation, to really allow for that generative self-discovery and self-reflection that leads the client to have the insights that are important in that moment by being present in the moment with them.
Yes, and it's challenging because we may have a lot of information about our clients, especially if they're longer term clients. So we may already go into, oh, that we know that about them. Yeah, they have challenges with delegation, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of hearing what are they bringing today around delegation, and I have their context. So that is always, to me, that beginner's mind. Can I be in the moment while also holding that I have information that may or may not be useful to bring in this moment?
And that is a really interesting point too. Like how I hear this from coaches often. How do I discern between the moment where I give space and allow the client to continue versus the need maybe to interrupt? And I find that to be such an interesting question. But to what you're speaking to, how do you begin to discern where you keep silent versus where there's a really an important place where maybe it's useful to share a perspective, open-handed perspective without attachment and all of that. But how do you discern those moments? Or if you've even thought about, I'm sure you have, though. My guess is you have. So I'm not, I don't think I'm throwing you out there in the deep end of the pool by any means.
This comes up all the time with coaches I mentor, Lyssa, is this concept, and it's taught in coach training schools, and I feel like it's needs to be upgraded for most coach training schools around what's the purpose of interruptions and how do I interrupt and when. I've written many articles on this. So one of the things that I say is whenever you interrupt, you have to first of all consider for what purpose. Is it because the coach believes the client is talking too long, the stories are too long, something is they're not being succinct enough, which is all about the coach and their beliefs or their training. It's not about actually what's happening in the moment. I see you.
I'm loving this. You keep it up, sister. I am listening.
Yeah, no. Do you want to share anything? It's coming.
No, I really am loving listening to you.
Well, I mean, it's taught. I know it's taught in some coach training schools that client stories aren't important, that we need to bottom line them. We need to bottom line them.
Yeah,
Or they need, yeah. And it's such a crude way of, it's not about presence for any moment. And so that's what I mean. I actually find, and maybe we'll get into partnering as well, I find most coach training schools, because I encounter hundreds of coaches every year that I mentor across many coach training schools and cultures, I'm pretty aware of where the client coaches are being taught and what they're teaching as faculty. And they tell me, and this interruption one, so the one thing I always say is, if you're going to interrupt, you better make sure you know how to keep trust high. And I call it the spotlight on the client. Because for some people, as you said earlier, so important. And there's a quote that I use, and I'm not good at quoting quotes directly, but it's something along the lines of, for most people, being heard is so close to feeling loved that they don't know the difference. So because we aren't really heard, when we're
that
listened to,
Yeah, that
yeah,
is, I can feel that one just in my heart as you say it. I think that is such a deep truth. And I think if you come with that belief and understanding that we can't tell the difference between being loved and being heard, I mean, I think it shifts the mindset of how you approach every single human being you interact with.
see, I could see that
Yeah, I
impact
can
on your
feel
whole
it. I can
body.
feel that one. Yeah. And I align with it. I mean, it's one of the things that, it's one of the things that I really believe is that we spend so much time in our lives having relationships where we don't feel heard. And then to build trust in a coaching relationship, and I too have a coach that I work with regularly, the trust that's established between us is a high degree of trust. So in those cases, if I am saying something, and I'm an external processor, so when I'm in my own coaching, it probably just babble on, but it makes sense in my brain what I'm talking about. And I'm not talking about a story that's external. I'm processing an internal experience out loud. And for me, a coach who's going to interrupt that is stopping my brain from processing. And I think that that's a big piece of this silence and the pause and allowing the client to have that space so that they can process in their own way. And the interruption, if it's for the purpose of my benefit, like I said something that maybe I just overlooked, then that makes perfect sense to interrupt me like, hey, you just said something that sounded important. I don't know if it is, but as you hear me like stop you here, what are you noticing? Versus, let me stop this story and could you just sort of bottom line what's important to you? Two very different ways of being in relationship.
Yeah, even the tone you use changed,
Even the tone,
and that's
because that's
often the
the tone.
case. Yeah, tone makes a difference, big
Yeah.
difference. Yeah. So you just demonstrated that with your body shift, that had a profound impact. And I mean, I am going to answer the question you asked around how and when do you interrupt. First thing I want to say though is this is what we need to be doing as coaches, is observing in the moment and then not continuing on. It's like, I saw the impact on your body and I heard you say, and therefore, shut up, Carly. You know, it's not about me. It's about your experience in this moment, even though we're not coaching, we're in connection. And it's still, to me, I want to be the same type of person. I wish I could be with some customer support people. I'm not. I'm still working on that, but I want to be the same type of person who can be generous with my listening no matter what.
Yeah.
Uh, so the fact that well, I don't know about you, but in my childhood, that was the message. Shut up. Children aren't to be heard. They're to be seen and not heard. So that may not be true for everyone, and it may not be true for every generation. And certainly uh, it was in mine. And so the moment somebody says to me, basically, shut up, stop talking, I've done a lot of personal development work, but it's going to trigger a reaction in me. And, like, hey, no, you don't get to interrupt me. I'm sorry. I don't care if I'm paying you or not. This is not your space.
Right.
And what I have to say is worthwhile to me. And to your point, Lyssa, maybe I need to. Some of us are internal processes who then externalize it. Other people are external who then take it internal. So whichever way, we just need to be watching and observing and sensing what's happening over there and be able to allow that space for the other person.
Yeah. And you had mentioned partnering. I mean, in my mind, a lot of what you're talking about really is the demonstration of partnership also. I think coaches have an idea, and this is my 2 cents. I could be wrong, and this doesn't apply globally to every coach. But I think there's a large part of this partnering that goes back to something you said earlier, which is, how am I delivering the goods to you? Like, I have this value I've got to give you, and this brings out that expertise. Let me tell you how to do it. Let me whatever. And I think that that's a grave misunderstanding of partnership personally. And what you're demonstrating and how you were even responding to me, responding to you, is in my mind a demonstration of the type of partnership that is so important. What would you add to that?
Yeah, that's a really nice segue into partnering. Well, a lot of coaches espouse things at the beginning, and certainly I learned those too 25 years ago in my coach training programs. Like, well, you're whole and resourceful, and you have all the answers, and uh, sometimes you may say things, and I may interrupt you to ask you more about that, or to bottom line that is okay with you. And then the client goes, yeah, because honestly, they don't know any different, and
And
they
they're
don't
nice,
know. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Sure.
It's really irresponsible of a coach to then actually interrupt and then not consider the impact, and also that, well, I told you I might interrupt, so to speak, versus uh, what are the reasons? We may need to discuss what might be some of the purposes of interruption. Personally, I think the first thing coaches need to do is actually observe rather than interrupt, is actually observe. So if a client, and this is partnering as well, it's like I will first observe you. And if there's something that I'm noticing, rather than interrupt you, I might make an observation about the way you're communicating and
Mm,
get your input on that, not about the words you're saying, but how you're actually delivering whatever you're sharing, whether that's somatically, I'm noticing nonverbal communication, or if I'm noticing certain words and energies and words and concepts and metaphors. So to me, that partnering is more useful than I may interrupt you versus if I interrupt you, I feel like that's potentially breaking trust with you. However, what I might do is observe, and then we can talk about that and see if that actually leads to some other things that we can decide. If you go down this path, what would be a way to handle that if that's a repetitive theme that recycles?
mhm. Yeah,
What are your
yeah.
thoughts, Lyssa? Because I've
Well,
never
I
said that
mean,
out loud before like that.
yeah, no, and I think that is so important. And I think there's a intentionality that's set up also in the sort of the space of the agreement, which creates more trust and safety, that the client knows that you're not just interrupting for the purpose of hearing yourself speak or to share knowledge, but rather for the benefit of them for some reason, or I'm just going to wait until you're done and then make an observation and then turn it back to you to see how that lands and what's showing up for you. I know my part of my learning journey in this entire process of moving from therapist into coaching and really, diving deeply into coaching has been when I get excited sometimes. I think coaches can relate to that. And you hear your client say something brilliant and you're like, like, oh my gosh, stop, right? Like, so the interruption comes in places like that for me. And it's still, I think, a good reminder that maybe just even taking a bit of a pause there and slowing down and observing and not interrupting. Although I do think there's a place, and I think you alluded to this, I think there's a place, especially in the auto debrief that people get into, where I liken it to trees falling in a forest. If a tree falls in a forest and none of us hear it, did it make a sound? And I think if the coach, there are times where the client says something so important or profound to what their overarching theme is, whether it's confidence or how they show up or the ability to speak up or lead better, that those are maybe moments where we're like, oh, and we have that kind of trust with our client where they're like, what did I just say, right? Because that's been established and brought forward, that then they go, what did I say? And you're like, I heard these words. What did that mean? We're turning it back to them. So the interruption isn't a stopping of the story, but an elaboration of the thing that showed up that sounded important. And we could be wrong. We're just testing a hypothesis, right? The client may be like, oh yeah, that's not important at all. Okay, then carry on. Sorry about that. I'll be quiet now. I don't know.
Yeah.
How does that, how do you hear that?
Well, I may have a different perspective. I honor yours. So one of the things that we can do as coaches is with our energy, we can, in our verbal, and you were doing it with me, and I do it with you, no doubt, we can use our body language to influence our clients or what we think. So in the moment, the client's saying something, we go, and they go, what did you just get? So some coaches use their small words and sounds and their body language to interrupt because they think that's important in that moment. And I think it's the way we do it. Like if the client has just said something that seems profound to us, it may or may not be to them, but I think it's the way. So I might actually say, may I ask you to pause for a moment? And then shut up for a moment and let the client actually, because they may be still, and rather than just go on. So it's actually, again, the conscious awareness of how we do it. So we honor and keep the trust high for the client, and that we're not saying, oh, I just got something. It's me. I need to tell you now, even though it's about you. It's really in this moment because I'm feeling excited for you. And that really we want to be doing. Personally, I think that's actually also not really honoring the client
Right.
versus, may I ask you to pause for a moment? There's something you just shared that felt really important. I just want to check with you how you felt when you said blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That to me is a more useful way of interrupting
Yeah.
consciously than all of a sudden the coach just starts talking. Because I tell you what, that's not going to work for me. That's like, you know, you don't just get to talk over the top of me. Be conscious. When my coach, and I have my coach says, and she's very, very spacious, and she'll just look at me and she'll go, huh, when you said that, blah, blah, blah. And it's like so deep. It's like she doesn't have any need to interrupt me ever, ever. And that's what I love about her is, and yet when she says something, it is so
You're like,
profound. Oh, and the only thing I think is really important for us to be paying attention to is when a client is going into a spiral of self-criticism, that seems to be a pattern. And then I'll say, can I just jump in here for a moment? Which is an interruption, but I'm going to wait a moment, a second or two. They go, oh, yeah, okay. all right, so this seems, and this happened yesterday. I had to did this. I chose to because this client started doing this spiral and it happens. And I said, I just wanted to check with you. It seems like I can see the emotion coming up.
Yeah.
And what's the self-talk going on right now?
Okay.
And it's the same self-talk. And then while it was challenging, and it was challenging for both of us, that was not an easy session because I kept on saying, I sense the defensiveness here. And this is a passion we've talked about. And I just want to check with you. What do you need from me right now? So I didn't just like step over it, but I did interrupt with kindness.
Yeah.
And it was, and then they emailed me after to say, thank you. I know it wasn't easy for you or for me. And I listened to, myself after I heard myself back when you talked to me. And I realized that it was really good that you helped me identify this as a pattern that I go into
Yeah.
again.
Yeah. I like that. And I don't think it's that much of a difference in the sense of, I do like that approach though, with less energy. I think I sometimes with certain clients, I get very energetic with them. And it works. And I think then with other people, so I think that goes back to also the trust and the relationship you have built with the person. We approach it differently with different clients. And I think if we are holding the space safely, I think the approach of coming into it a bit more softly. May I interrupt you here? There was something that was said that I think was possibly useful. May I share that? And giving that pause, because the client is typically going to be nice and say sure. Like occasionally they will be like, if there's really good trust and they really feel it, they'll be like, no, I don't want to. Like, let me finish this, and you just go on, and then you can come back to it later. But I think that leaving the client that choice is so important. Also, we're not just jumping in there and sharing something without that permission.
Yes, and that's, I think, and you're right. I mean, knowing your client and the rapport you have. I mean, high energy, more extroverted client, me can be more extroverted, and with lower external processing people who are more introverted. I don't like those labels, by the way, but just who may be more intra considerations of how they're processing, because every client has emotions, every client has thoughts, feelings, beliefs. It's the relationship we have as to how. And I personally like a little lightness, and I will, when possible, find things that we can laugh at together. It's just part of my way of how I show up. I like that. I love making my husband laugh every single day, and it's not something I try. There's just little things in life I like to find funny. So again, I try to be the same person. And yet, if there's a client who's deeply and emotional, there's no time to, that's not
Like,
the
let's
time.
lighten this
Well,
up.
it's not, no. But some coaches will, because they're
Yeah.
uncomfortable with the
Yeah.
amount of emotion that's going on. I have to tell you, yesterday was uncomfortable for both of us.
Right.
And times I was breathing deeply and silently and being present and holding the love and kindness and energy for this high performing person who was being challenged by what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah. And that brings a really important point forward. And this point has showed up on the in the coaching studio several times. And I just think you probably can't be said enough, which is we have to learn to hold the space for these emotions, which means there's work that either we need to do for ourselves so that we can manage and regulate ourselves through the discomfort that we're feeling, or address with our own coach the things that are showing up. I think it's a valuable purpose of supervision. Like, I'm noticing when a client comes with strong emotions, I try and step over it or lighten the mood or take them someplace else so that they don't feel bad. That's the coach. That goes back to, that's the coach's issue, not the client's issue. The client is demonstrating just a huge degree of trust to even bring it forward. Then how do we hold that space for them? To your point, what needs to be explored here around this pattern that we're seeing? That what do you need from me? Is, I think, even the language I heard you ask the client. and that capacity to hold the space, even though we're feeling uncomfortable, that takes doing our own work. Yeah, I see you nodding.
Oh, yes. And you, as a therapist, you're not a practicing therapist anymore, is it?
No.
Yeah. So I'm interested how you've seen the evolution, because you've been a long-term coach as well, how you've seen the evolution of emotional content and how it's treated in coaching now versus maybe when you were.
Yeah. It's it's an interesting one. You're turning the question on me. And two, but I think it's a really interesting thing. I really struggle with, sometimes when emotions come up and I hear a coach go into the emotion and it takes the person back to whatever the trauma is, whether it was a small T or big T trauma, that's where the coach is sort of leading the client. And I don't know what you think of this. It is sort of a side note, but I think anybody who asks the questions is in power in the conversation because they're leading the person somewhere. Look at the sun. Don't think of pink elephants, like any of that sort of stuff. It's priming the person on the other end of the question in a particular way. And so I think, in therapy, one of the differences is if the trauma or the emotion comes up and they're there to go from dysfunctional to functional, the trauma is part of the work that needs to be done. And as the therapist, you're teaching them to learn how to go into and out of the trauma so that they can safely go into the trauma and really explore what needs to be explored in order to move towards functional, right? Like there's the purpose to it that's there. That's my take on it. In coaching, and even as a therapist, a past therapist, I'm still clinically licensed, but I don't do therapy. I'm not looking at going back into it and doing the developmental work of like creating those safety containers. And this is where I get really worried about coaches who are trauma informed. I need to do more research on the trauma informed coaching. But when emotion comes up, what is this emotion telling you now? And how does it impact where you're going? I think the difference is that we're not overstepping the emotion, but rather we're not going back to give them the tools and resources they need in order to be able to even go into the trauma. And we're allowing the client to lead us through the trauma in the way that resonates for them. And most people won't go into something that they are scared of going into without a safe container, right? And so then if you were giving that framework of, I see the emotion here and what's important about it, and how does it link to where you want to go, what the client has is a pathway forward towards their goal, and they can start to make meaning between what they're noticing here and where they want to be. I don't know. That's sort of the way I see it as I'm working with people.
Yeah, look, everything you said, my body resonated with. Just, the thing with emotions is we got the field of emotional intelligence. It's such a gift, what
Mhm.
Daniel Goleman sort of and others brought to us. And I remember beginning of my coaching years, there were lawsuits against coaching by therapists saying you're stepping into our territory. And ICF has a code of ethics, and we know where we actually have a line. And I'm with you. I just had somebody email me a couple of days ago, very concerned that trauma-informed coaching is being taught as if it's, and there was a speaker apparently who speaks as if they're a master coach and I don't know anything about these people, and I have done a little bit of training in trauma-informed coaching, and what I felt was it needs a therapist.
Yeah.
This is the time for me where you need to be a therapist in order to coach trauma-informed coaching. And I've never felt that about anything. And this, like, you need to know where the line is, but this is a real concern, and not only for me, but I'm hearing it now and if one person is thinking that and they contact me, I
That
know
means
there's
many
many
people.
others are, and they
Yeah.
just don't know who
Well,
to be concerned to about it.
yeah, and honestly, I mean, and I'm sure I'll hear from people as a result of this conversation, which will be interesting. But I mean, my training as a therapist was in trauma. I started off doing child protective services, working with families where there was trauma and violence, and then with the military, and then in my own private practice, my focus was PTSD, complex trauma, and dissociative disorders. And there is so much training that went into that. Like, I didn't just like, hey, this is what I'm going to do. That work it requires that a very high degree of training, because people can be re-traumatized so easily. I mean, honestly, even in a conversation where we interrupt somebody, if the pattern is, as a kid, to your point, shut up and go play in traffic, nobody really wants to hear what you have to say, and you're not alone in having that experience. I mean, I know it was a big problem with me writing a book, was all I could hear in my head was shut up, nobody wants to hear what you're saying, and I had to kind of work through it. So it doesn't take much to activate a past trauma. It just doesn't, because it's alive in us. And I mean, I think it's kind of the work of Bessel van der Kolk, with the whole the body keeps the score, and the idea that the trauma doesn't go away. So how do we hold it in a way that's safe? And that takes a lot of training to learn how to do. And even people who are trained therapists struggle with it, because it is such a hard container to hold. It's exhausting. And so I always wonder with coaching and trauma-informed coaching specifically, and again, I don't have enough information on it, like you, I just don't do that kind. I mean, if trauma comes up, I really am always looking at it in regard to, what do you need to learn from this so that you can move forward, not let's go into it. And I think that kind of goes back to like the work from Case Western University and Boyatz's work around the positive emotional attractors, and really not diving into places where people can be re-traumatized and get lost in this morass of pain, but rather, where do we need to go? And if they can't do that, if they start spinning and spiraling around the trauma, I think, the ICF has a whole article on when to refer to a therapist. And if it isn't in there that the client can't get past the spiraling, that they're not there yet, then that's the place where a coach needs to be working with a therapist who specializes in working with trauma. Because it's like any other specialty. Like, I never worked with addiction. When anybody had an addiction issue, I'm like, you need to work with an expert in addiction. This is my expertise. None of this will work if you're using. So let's deal with the using, and then we'll deal with this stuff. And I think that there needs to be more partnership, but I also think coaches can do very bad therapy very quickly if they're not paying attention.
I am with you. I'm so glad that you've got this on recording, and I know we're going to ruffle some feathers by having this conversation. And I think it's important for us to be having these challenging conversations, because as a profession, one of the things that we want is that our clients always feel trust and safety, and we need to know the boundaries. And I feel like I've learned so much by doing emotional intelligence training. By far, the most I've learned is by doing personal development and therapy, and sitting in groups taught me how to listen. I just learned so much about myself, and the type of coach I work with has to be very deep and metaphysical. It has to be able to travel the universe in different ways. So most coaches that again, health coaching is a real challenge for me too, is how well trained are people to deal with people's health challenges. I've got some minor health challenges right now as I'm aging, and really, even that is requiring specialized attention. If I brought that to a coach onto how to, what was going on in that, it's wow, even just I think that's challenging. So we have these areas, and so the future of coaching, I feel like we need to keep holding where is the ability to be with the whole person, with their feelings, with their thoughts, with their ways of expressing. A lot of people express visually and metaphorically. By far, the most people do
Love
that.
that.
Every conversation, I can pick out some visual, metaphorical words, everyone, I can assure you. If we can stay with that and the client's emotional connection to that, and if it starts to become more about I mean, I'm dealing with people in the Middle East where one of the main things they tell me, coaches, is we need to be therapists more than coaches because the amount of trauma in parts of the world, and many parts of the world is traumatized because of male dominance and
Mhm.
still, beliefs about minorities, and we have it in this country here, is we need to keep advocating for what coaching is and the boundaries so that we can be of
Mhm.
service and not cross those boundaries, which I would never go into trauma informed anything. I'm very experienced in
Right.
a long period of time in my own work, but
Yeah.
I would need to be specially trained, like you said, to do any type of trauma, and that's not in my field. And
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, it really, I mean, even when I was doing the therapeutic work around trauma, they don't call it supervision in therapy because there's legal liability to supervision in therapy. So it's called consultations. But I was in regular consultations with people to make sure I'm not crazy, like this is happening. Am I crazy or am I overreacting? Because there's just so many layers to working with really deep trauma, and even with just small t trauma that happens throughout a person's life, to hold that space. I mean, you if you're going to do it, what I would say is you need to have a consultation or a supervision partner that as a coach that you are meeting with, probably if not monthly, twice monthly, so that you're not doing that work alone. Because it is also, we can be very good at kind of holding ourselves in that sort of dissociated space ourselves, and like I've got the container for you and I'm holding it, but not recognize our own level of burnout and our own level of wanting to help people to get better, and that becomes a hindrance to the person's own process. And so like if you're going to do that kind of work, and maybe there's a place for it, I'm not sure, again, make sure you are well surrounded by a lot of people who can support you in doing that work, to include hopefully maybe a partnership with a therapist, and also with your own supervision and with your consultation with people who are experts in that field, so that you are making sure you can hold that space cleanly. It's I mean, when I left therapy to become a coach, and at the end of 2013, I didn't realize how burned out I was. I just didn't even realize it. And my husband was so funny at the end of 2014. He's like, "Well, I knew you were burned out, but I didn't know it was like going to be a year of you being a docent at the art museum burned out." And I just laughing. I'm like, "Who knew?" But I think it's just really hard work to do, and so I think it takes specialized training, not only with just working with the topics and the things that you're holding, but also just for your own taking self-care. Like you can think you're doing a great job with self-care, and yet you can still get really burned out because it is very hard, heavy work. And I did it
yeah,
for 20 years, and it was like, God, it was like,
yeah,
afterwards, it was a lot. Um, this
that's
has just
great.
been such
Uh,
an interesting and I think important conversation. I mean, I have a feeling you and I will have more conversations about this. It leads me, and I know I'm looking at the time. I want to be cognizant of your time, but I really I have two questions that are left, and I don't know how long one will take. And you can maybe say this is too deep of a question. But the issue of licensure then is something that sort of comes to mind as we're talking about this, because I think of like my hairstylist has to have a license in order to cut my hair, and the lady who did somebody's nails, not mine, but somebody's nails, it has to have a license. And I wonder, and I know ICF has been sort of against it, but I know like in Hungary, they're like, you have to have a certain training in order to be able to call yourself a coach. And I wonder your thoughts on this idea of coaches being licensed.
mm, haven't thought about it until you asked me that question. It's really not ever
Oh,
been in my sphere. So this is great. You're going to get a real spontaneous answer. And I have plenty of time if you need it. The big thing, I think, to be honest, is I don't know why I say to be honest. The big thing is credentialing.
yeah.
To me, What we're dealing with right now in the world since the last 3 years is a huge shift in all of the workplace environments, which created new ways for people to get coaching, mostly via Zoom and other virtual modalities or methods, whatever you call them. The quality of coaching, I feel I'm just being aware that the quality of coaching is questionable for quite a few people right now. There's too many coaches who don't have a credential. So I'm not for licensing, to be honest. Why am I saying that, Lyssa?
I
I'm
don't
saying
know.
to be
Honest,
honest.
it's
I
okay.
never say to be honest. That's so funny. To be honest, um, no, I think that's why I really am professional coaching is about having a credential, because at least we are, and to be an ICF member. I have been a continuous ICF Global member since 1999. Continuous. I invested because I just felt I need to be part of an organization that has a code of ethics, that has accountability. I have used the ethics review committee once to resolve a ethics issue, and they did a really wonderful job. I feel like every coach needs to have a credential, and they need to be part of the ICF to be part of something that has an ethics board, and they need to study ethics. Those coaches out there who say I've been coaching all my life, or I've been an executive, or that I've done this and that and life experience, they're not coaches. They may use coaching skills, they may be listening, but they're actually coming from a problem solving, mentoring, expertise mindset. So I really am passionate. The reason I get involved in ICF and I'm on 2 different project committee things right now, because I believe in our industry and that ICF is a way for us to continue to hold standards.
Mhm.
And why a lot of companies, I've got people who come to me for mentoring that are being forced to get a credential, ICF credential, because they can't get a job as a coach in certain organizations without having the ICF credential. That to me is what I want to hear. I want no coach to be out there in the world who doesn't have an ICF credential, that has an ethics, a code of ethics that they
Yeah.
have to abide by and learn about. And I feel like what we could do more of, Lyssa, as an ICF, is actually require all of us to go through 20 hours of ethics training every year. I
Mhm.
mean, that would be to me what I'd want rather than a license.
Yeah. Well, hopefully not 20. That's a lot, but
Yeah, I know, I made that up. 3
As,
isn't
as a
enough.
person who's been in a class on ethics since 1992, pretty frequently, 20 hours is a lot every year. But I think your point is well taken. I may be slightly a little bit on the other side of the fence, just because I don't see people necessarily doing that. And so I think that there may be kind of a 1-2 thing, that where the ICF becomes like I'm a social worker, so the NASW is our American like ICF for social workers, professional programming or whatever. Anyway, and they work with creating the exam and all of that, but you still have to get a license and demonstrate that you're doing your CCs and things like that each every year, or every 3 years, or every 2 years, or however it works in different states. But I really think that the credentialing piece is crucial. And I also think the staying, like not just joining for a year to get your credential and then falling off for 2 years and then having to do it again next time you're going to get a credential. I think it's that really participating and really continuing to do your self-development. This has just been great. I do have my last question. If you were to recommend somebody other than yourself, because I know you're definitely a great referral for people who are looking to up-level their coaching, is there like a thought leader or a book or a resource that you recommend to people that you think it would support new coaches? I had actually a listener say to me, one thing that I would love to hear from each of these people is who they are reading or who they recommend, or, some thought leader that they think is worthy of listening to.
I am not a big book reader, so I'm not going to answer. I'm going to do that in a very different way, and this is probably going to sort of surprise you. For about 6 months, one of my clients has been. She has behind her, behind the Believe sign from Ted Lasso,
Oh my God. Yeah.
and and I said, "What's that sign?" She says, "You haven't watched Ted Lasso?" I said, "No." She said, "Oh, you have to." And I am very good at boundaring my time, and I'm massively passionate about sports and certain things. So she kept on it, and I said, "Okay, I'll make an agreement with you that sometime this year I will watch it because I don't have Apple TV. I will watch it." Well, last week and the week before, during that time, my husband and I were out in Palm Springs on vacation in 40 degrees Celsius, 110-degree heat for
Oh,
those, um, in a beautiful Airbnb house with the most gorgeous pool with Apple TV. So watched season 1, season 2, and started on season 3 in our
now
week,
have Apple TV.
and then got the app for a week and free trial and finished off the rest of the season 3. And without a doubt, and my husband is a very psychologically mature person, as with I believe I am too, um, we both went, "Oh my gosh, this is
It's
the best study
fabulous.
in people psychology." If you study every single episode and do it as a group, like even like discuss like what was that about? Because to me, that is the most brilliant, heartfelt, positive, challenging set of experiences that if any coach wants to learn about human behavior and about how to handle challenging situations, that's what I would recommend. Ted
I
Lasso, season 1,
I
2, and 3.
1000 times agree with you. Woo to Ted Lasso. I mean, it's one of those things. I've now watched all 3 seasons like 4 times because I'll watch it, and then each time I watch this, like I'll start over at the beginning and I'll get some other nugget, right? My best friend had come to visit recently, and so we went through the majority of it in the week that she was here. We got it was just, and she was like, "How good could it be? It's about soccer." And then she's like, "Oh my God, I'm hooked." Because it isn't about soccer. I mean, that's a sideline, but it's about that human relationships, and the characters do such a beautiful job of expressing that. I love that. That's a great recommendation. I second it. Highly second it. Carly, thank you so much for your time today and being on the studio. I really appreciate it.
It's been such a joy, and who knew the roads we would travel, as they say. I had no idea where we would go today, and it was such a delight. I feel so energized having this conversation with you.